Jungkook stared at Taehyung, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. His professor, his mentor, the man who held Jungkook's future in his hands, had just uttered the words that shattered every ounce of respect Jungkook had ever had for him. "Sleep with me, and I'll make sure your thesis is approved." For a moment, Jungkook thought he misheard. But no. Taehyung sat there, legs crossed, fingers drumming lazily on the polished surface of his desk, as if he hadn't just reduced Jungkook's entire career, his years of hard work, to a single, disgusting proposition. The office felt suffocating. The dim lighting cast shadows over Taehyung's face, making him look like the very devil Jungkook wanted to believe he wasn't. Jungkook's hands clenched into fists. "You're joking," Taehyung arched an eyebrow, tilting his head slightly. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jungkook felt like the floor beneath him had cracked open. This was the man he had once admired. The professor he had once looked up to. And now, Taehyung was looking at him not as a student, not as a scholar, but as something to be bought. Something to be owned. Jungkook's heart pounded. "If I say no," his voice came out hoarse. Taehyung exhaled, as if he were bored. "Then you fail." Jungkook let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You're a disgust." Taehyung's lips curled, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "And yet, here you are." Jungkook's stomach twisted. "You planned this, didn't you?" He took a step back, trying to put as much distance as possible between them. "You waited until I had no other options." Taehyung didn't deny it. He simply leaned forward, placing his elbows on his desk, chin resting on his interlaced fingers. "You're brilliant, Jungkook. But brilliance isn't always enough. The world doesn't reward hard work, it rewards those who know how to play the game." Jungkook swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "And you think this is a game?" Taehyung smirked. "Everything is a game." Jungkook's vision blurred with unshed tears, anger, humiliation, betrayal all twisting inside him until he could barely breathe. How dare he? How dare Taehyung take everything Jungkook had worked for and twist it into this? But even as his body shook, even as rage burned through his veins, another feeling lurked underneath. Fear. Because Taehyung wasn't just anyone. He wasn't just a professor, he was a powerful man, someone with influence, someone who could make or break Jungkook's future with a single word. Jungkook's hands trembled. He hated that he was afraid. But more than that, he hated the part of himself that hesitated. Because despite everything, despite the cruelty in Taehyung's words, the cold detachment in his voice, Jungkook knew something else, something far worse. He wanted him. He had always wanted him. And that was the most unforgivable thing of all. Jungkook closed his eyes, his breath shaky. "I hate you," he whispered. Taehyung stood up, slow and deliberate, walking around the desk until he was standing right in front of Jungkook. Jungkook didn't move. Taehyung reached out, brushing a knuckle against Jungkook's jaw, his touch feather-light but heavy with unspoken meaning. "Then hate me," Taehyung murmured. "As long as you're mine." Jungkook's breath hitched. Because in that moment, he realized, he had already lost. Jungkook knew he should walk away. He should spit in Taehyung's face, throw his thesis in the trash, and tell him to go to hell. But he didn't. Because that would mean letting go of everything he had worked for. Years of sleepless nights, endless research, pushing himself beyond his limits, all of it would be wasted. And Taehyung knew that. That's why he wasn't in a hurry. That's why he stood there, perfectly composed, waiting for Jungkook to break. Jungkook's fingers curled into fists at his sides. Why me? His voice came out quieter than he intended. You could have anyone. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Because you fascinate me, Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. That's it? That's your reason? Taehyung stepped closer. You think I don't see it? The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. Jungkook's stomach twisted. You're wrong. Taehyung's voice was calm, but there was something dangerous underneath. Then prove it. Jungkook frowned. What? Walk away? Jungkook froze. Taehyung leaned in slightly, his breath warm against Jungkook's ear. You're free to leave, Jungkook. I won't stop you. Jungkook's pulse pounded so hard he thought he might be sick. This was it. His chance. His way out. And yet, he didn't move. Taehyung hummed, his lips barely brushing the shell of Jungkook's ear. See? You want this just as much as I do. Jungkook's breath hitched. He should deny it, should push him away, but when Taehyung's fingers brushed against his waist, a shiver ran through him. He hated him. Hated the way he made Jungkook feel things he had no right to feel. Hated the way his body responded, even when his mind screamed at him to run. Hated that some part of him, some twisted, desperate part, wanted to see how far Taehyung would take this. Taehyung's fingers traced his jaw, tilting his face up until their eyes met. Say it, Jungkook swallowed. Say what? Taehyung's eyes darkened. That you don't want me. Jungkook opened his mouth. Close it. Taehyung smirked. That's what I thought. Jungkook clenched his jaw. You're insufferable, Taehyung chuckled, his fingers tightening ever so slightly. And yet, here you're. Jungkook hated how easily Taehyung could unravel him. Hated how much he wanted to be unraveled. So when Taehyung leaned in, when his lips gusted over Jungkook's, Jungkook did the one thing he swore he never would, he didn't pull away. Jungkook felt the warmth of Taehyung's breath against his lips, the proximity suffocating. His pulse was erratic, hands trembling by his sides as he fought the pull of something dangerous, something he refused to name. Taehyung's fingers gusted over his jawline, light but possessive, as if testing the limits of his control. Still not leaving, he murmured, voice laced with amusement. Jungkook forced himself to breathe, to think through the haze of anger and something far worse, desire. He hated Taehyung. Hated the way he spoke as if he already knew the answer. Hated the way his touch made Jungkook's body betray him. And most of all, he hated the truth sitting heavily between them. Taehyung was right. Jungkook didn't want to leave. But he wasn't about to let Taehyung win that easily. With a sharp inhale, he lifted his chin, forcing steel into his gaze. Is this how you get everything you want? He asked, voice cutting. Dangling power over people who can't afford to lose. Taehyung's smirk didn't waver. Power exists for a reason. You of all people should know that, Jungkook scoffed. And what about dignity? Or are you so used to buying people that you've forgotten what it feels like to actually earn someone's respect for the first time? Taehyung's eyes flickered, just for a second. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Jungkook caught it. A crack in the perfect mask. A shift. And that's when Jungkook realized, Taehyung wasn't as untouchable as he wanted people to believe. Heart pounding, Jungkook took a step forward. You think you own me? His voice was quieter now, dangerously calm. You think just because you have power, money, and influence, you can make me do whatever you want? Taehyung didn't answer, but his smirk was gone. Jungkook leaned in, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in Taehyung's dark eyes. "Let me tell you something, Professor," he let the word roll off his tongue, almost mocking. "You might have me cornered now, but don't mistake my silence for surrender." Taehyung tilted his head, unreadable. Oh, Jungkook smiled, slow and deliberate. "One day, the power balance will shift." He stepped back, smoothing down his shirt, as if Taehyung's touch had left a stain. And when it does, his eyes met Taehyung's, burning with a promise. "I'll make sure you are the one begging." Silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, to Jungkook's frustration, Taehyung chuckled. "Low. Dangerous. Interesting," Taehyung murmured, eyes dark with something unreadable. Jungkook clenched his fists, swallowing down the fire in his throat. Taehyung might have won tonight. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. The air between them was thick, charged with something neither of them could name nor deny. Jungkook could feel Taehyung's gaze burning into him, his smirk still in place, but something had shifted. The professor was no longer amused. He was intrigued. And that was dangerous. Jungkook's breath came uneven as he took a step back. Not in retreat, but in defiance. He needed space, needed to remember who he was, what this was. Taehyung was playing a game, one where he held all the cards. But Jungkook wasn't just a pawn to be moved at his whim. Taehyung exhaled slowly, watching him. "You speak as if you don't already know the truth," he murmured, stepping closer, his presence suffocating yet intoxicating. "You act like you have a choice." Jungkook's jaw clenched. "I do," Taehyung hummed, tilting his head. "Then why are you still here?" The words struck something deep inside Jungkook, twisting at the ugly truth he wasn't ready to face. Why was he still here? He couldn't have walked away. Should have walked away. But he hadn't. Because despite the anger burning in his chest, despite the resentment curdling in his stomach, a part of him wanted this. A part of him had always wanted this. Taehyung had always been an enigma, a force that drew Jungkook in despite every logical reason to resist. And now, with his professor standing before him, gaze unwavering, lips curled in the ghost of a smirk, Jungkook felt himself losing control. And he hated it. Hated that Taehyung saw through him so easily. Hated that Taehyung knew. Jungkook exhaled sharply. "You think you have me figured out?" he said, voice quieter now, more dangerous. Taehyung lifted a brow. "Don't I?" Jungkook laughed, the sound bitter. "You think you can break me?" He took a step forward this time, closing the distance once more. "You think you can own me?" Taehyung didn't move. Didn't flinch. But there was something different in his eyes now, something darker, deeper. Jungkook smirked. "What if I break you first?" Silence. Then, something shifted in Taehyung's expression. Amusement. Interest. Desire. Jungkook barely had time to process it before Taehyung was on him, closing the remaining distance in a breath, fingers gripping Jungkook's wrist and yanking him closer. Jungkook gasped, but Taehyung was already speaking, voice low and steady. "Tried?" The challenge hung between them like a razor's edge. Jungkook's pulse thundered. His breathing was uneven, his body betraying him in ways he wasn't ready to admit. But Taehyung was waiting. Jungkook knew he could push him away. He should push him away. But instead, he leaned in. A mistake. Because the moment he did, Taehyung pulled him in the rest of the way, lips crashing against his, hands gripping his waist as if daring him to pull away. Jungkook couldn't. Because this wasn't just about surrender. It was about power. And if Jungkook was going to fall, he was taking Taehyung down with him.